Welcome back, everyone, to The Sensitivity Doctor. This is your host, Dr. Amelia Kelley, a fellow highly sensitive who wants to know all the answers to all the questions. And my question today was, what does it mean to be a highly sensitive person? I unpack this with holistic practitioner and podcaster Michelle Oravitz, who is a friend of this podcast and has been here before. She is wonderful. And we unpack the different subtleties of what it means to be highly sensitive. Maybe perhaps you're curious yourself if you're highly sensitive, or maybe you're trying to help someone that you love understand what it means to be a highly sensitive person. Certain things that you might be asking yourself is, why do other people's moods impact me so much? Why am I so sensitive to pain or hunger or caffeine? Why do things like bright noises and sounds impact me so much? And why do I get so exhausted after a lot of socializing? We're going to dive into all of this. Things from how your nervous system responds to the environment, what is it about socializing, what is it about your work environment, and what is awesome about being a highly sensitive person. So get cozy and enjoy this episode on what does it mean to be a highly sensitive person with Michelle Oravitz. Well, Michelle, I'm super excited to have you back. We have gone back and forth on each other's podcasts a couple times. I just love talking to you.
Same.
And yes, and I think in our last episode, it just dawned on me that I didn't have an episode just highlighting what it means to be highly sensitive and what that looks like in the world and in our life. And so we decided, why not do an episode about it?
Love it. I'm so excited.
Yeah, me too. So can you start by telling the audience just a little bit about you in case they haven't heard your other episode, which was fabulous, and maybe when you discovered your own high sensitivity?
Yeah, such a great question. And it's amazing because you go through life and then afterwards you realize, wait, there's this thing. And you're like, that describes me. Exactly.
So well.
So basically my background was in architecture and I used to work in corporate world, completely different. And I think that for me, I don't know if this is typical for other people that are highly sensitive, but it was very tough on me to work in a cubicle and to be in a situation where I wasn't able to really express myself. And of course, you're sometimes sitting under fluorescent light and all of these things that impact you and just don't feel great. So I worked in that field, and then I changed my career once I was able to resolve my menstrual issues with acupuncture. But I think that a big thing is that, yes, I went in for menstrual cycle issues, but it helped me on so many other levels. It helped my sleep. And I think what happened was it was actually, well, now I know because I do acupuncture, but it was helping me on my nervous system. And I found myself feeling a lot more at ease and just able to deal with things or cope with things that I normally haven't in the past.
Right.
And so that was definitely a huge game changer because I was like, wow, this is helping me on so many other levels. So of course it changed my career down the line. I realized I need to do something that feels aligned with my soul because it just was not working for me at all. And I couldn't, I just didn't feel aligned, with the type of work that I was doing. And it was bugging me. It was something that was constantly nagging me behind the scenes. And finally, with the support of my amazing husband, who's a Western medicine doctor, by the way.
Oh, perfect.
He was pushing me to go back to school because he was like, this is something that you've always felt passionate about. It's something that you really like. And he kept reminding me, he's like, you don't like what you're doing. Don't try to convince yourself. And because I just didn't. So eventually that was what led me to change my career. But I do feel part of that is when you're in a situation that feels more soothing, which is really funny because at my work, I have soothing music. I make it very calming on the nervous system. And I feel so much more able to heal others in that environment. And then it also soothes other people's nervous system when they come in. So all those things, of course, as I studied Chinese medicine, I learned a little bit more about the body and also how the mind impacts the body and the body impacts the mind. it got me to understand subtleties really about us, about our nervous system, about our energetic frequencies, and just really what like makes us move, just like
Right.
what really is at the core of how we are as humans. And of course, everybody's at different levels, but I started picking up on my own energetic, I guess, like sensitivity. And the fact that I'm actually in a perfect job because I feel like people who are highly sensitive are able to heal and pick up on subtle cues from their patients or their
Right.
clients. And so I realized, wow, this is like really something, it's like a thing. And I kind of like used to call it more like being an empath. And I recognize it in my patients. And I'm like, it sounds like you're really absorbent into energy. And they were like, oh my God, yes, it really makes a difference to me where I am. And so what I realized was, you know, I had the same thing. And that's what I guess what I called it. And I said, really for me, what it was is learning how to manage your energy. And once I was able to do that, I was still able to connect with the gifts that it gave me to really be highly sensitive and then also to protect my energy as well at the same time. So it's kind of like learning how to manage it and
Right.
learning how to understand your cues and really respecting it and respecting how you're feeling.
Mm-hmm. And, I can really relate actually when you were talking about the job thing. And I want to speak on that, but I'm going to first make sure that we just pinpoint what high sensitivity is for anyone listening who maybe this is the first time they've listened to an episode about this or they're just now learning about this trait. So it is a genetic heritability and an evolutionary difference between certain brains. So it's a deviation that makes up upwards of 30% of all animal populations. So they can find this in everything from bugs to birds to horses to humans. And generally speaking, I mean, we're still learning so much, but those who are highly sensitive tend to have a more active limbic system. And so this includes the amygdala, which a lot of people know as the emotion center of the brain. The amygdala is the part of the brain that when you have a ball flying at your face, to get alert and catch it. You know when there's danger coming because your amygdala signals you. But the thing about the highly sensitive brain is that this amygdala is active much more often. And not only because of the fact that the limbic system is more sensitive, but also because there are other parts of our brain that attend more deeply to certain sensory input, such as our mirror neurons. Mirror neurons are these neurons in the brain that fire when we see someone do something and or when we're doing it. So that's the interesting thing. Someone who's highly sensitive, if we see, research has shown times where if we see images, for instance, of someone who's distressed or happy, our body will more deeply feel these certain emotions as well. So when you take someone who's highly sensitive and you put them in these environments where you're inundated with a lot of stimulation or a lot of people, there's many more layers to sift through. Now, you said empath. I'm glad you said empath because I think that there's this this collision of, is it empathy? Is it introversion? Is it high sensitivity? Is it, some people have even said, is it spectrum and autism? There's just this, I don't know, like a melting pot of what is it. I do think something that can be helpful to discern between all of them is these little nuances where, for instance, I once heard a great quote. I think it was Bloom Post, who was actually on the podcast a while ago, who was saying, you can be born highly sensitive, but you're made an empath. And her assertion is that our environment, our relationships demand us to be more attentive in certain situations. Let's say, for instance, you're brought up in a high stress environment or with caregivers who demand a lot of you emotionally, and you learn to deeply tune into others. This is where this empathy piece of where we feel what another person is feeling kicks in. Highly sensitives are more likely to become empaths.
Hmm.
So that
Interesting.
is, I think that's this little nuance. It's unlikely that someone will be a deep empath and not be highly sensitive, but you can be highly sensitive and not be a deep, deep empath. Okay. Now, introversion also, there's a lot of overlap and similarities. Have you read Susan Cain's book, Quiet?
No, so I've never read it.
It's phenomenal. She did so much research, and it's mainly centered around introversion, but there's a lot of things related to how the brain functions in introverts that sounded very similar to highly sensitives. But with high sensitivity, there is this other facet that has to do with sensory input and how the nervous system, to your point, being in a work environment that feels ideal and is supportive, is so much more important because the highly sensitive brain and body is deeply processing at rapid speed at all times. So there's so much more to talk about with this, and we'll unpack it throughout the rest of the episode. But getting back to what you were saying about work environment, I find it interesting because I haven't changed fields completely, but when I was working, I used to work in public mental health and nonprofits, and specifically at a methadone clinic in the area. And I absolutely loved the clients and the work, but the environment was very sterile. It was work hours that didn't match my sleep. I sometimes laugh that I'm the only one who took my office and tried to decorate it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I used to do stuff like that. I used to need plants and, whenever I was given the chance. Yeah.
And so I found, for anyone listening who's thinking, okay, great, if I'm highly sensitive, do I need to completely go back to school and change my job?
Right.
Not necessarily. There might be things within your field or even within your actual job that you could adjust. And so for me, it was a matter of going into an environment I could control, which was a private practice setting. Just like you were saying, controlling things like smell and lighting and all of this. When my nervous system is more regulated, I'm able to support my clients' nervous systems more.
Absolutely. And one thing that I also was going to mention, the way I perceive it, in Chinese medicine, we look at like elements, we look at like qualities. And one of the ways that I was able to like translate it in my mind, or sort of the visual that I had, was porous.
Oh, okay. Can you speak more on that?
Yeah, so basically, you just absorb more. You're able to, like, it's almost like the permeability of your inner world and like the outer world, kind of how your nervous system processes that, is a little bit more porous. It's more inclined, or has more of a tendency to absorb more.
And that's interesting too, because when we think about high sensitivity, there is research out there as well where it's equating the highly sensitive child or nervous system to an orchid. Have you heard of the orchid theory?
No.
So it's this way. I love that they use flowers to describe this. So when we think of an orchid, you need one single orchid to light up a room. Like, they are just so gorgeous, but they're a bit finicky. I've killed many of them.
I totally get it.
Yes, they need the right lighting, the right environment, just ice cubes to be watered. I don't know, all this crazy stuff to take care of an orchid. But when they are taken care of, they really flourish. They're beautiful. Whereas the more robust, I guess, resilient nervous system, hardy nervous system, I would rather say, is equated to being dandelions. So you think of a dandelion, they have medicinal purposes, they're beautiful, but you can literally mow them over with your lawnmower and they come back. And so if you look at the orchid theory, it's looking at the nervous systems and the bodies of more reactive children, which is what Kagan's work, was exploring introversion and reactivity in the nervous system back, I want to say, in the 80s. Don't quote me on that. It might be the 70s, actually. But what they're finding is that the nervous system and the bodies of highly sensitive children, and us as adults as well, we are more reactive and receptive to positives, just like we are more reactive and receptive to negatives. So instead of looking at us as just more sensitive, a good way of looking at the highly sensitive body and nervous system is as malleable.
Yes, so that was another thing that came to my mind. Yes.
So when you think about that in your own life, you spoke a little bit about work. How has this shown up in maybe your relationships?
So one thing that I noticed, and I remember we talked about this when you were on the podcast, is like a lot of noise or a lot of, and it's really funny because, well, my daughters are a little bit more like me, especially my older daughter. And I remember, I don't know what happened. They either, her friend was over and I was driving. So when I'm driving, if there's too much chatter in the back, it's hard for me to focus. And I'm like, okay, guys, can you keep it down? Because it's like, I'm like, I don't know where to put my attention, like on the car in front of me
Right.
or the back. And it's just like too much stimulation. So I remember one time without me even saying anything, I think the girl was really loud and she's like, she goes, my mom gets really overwhelmed if there's like too much going on in the car. And I think she felt it because she's sensitive. So it's kind of an interesting thing that she like noticed
Yeah.
that and said something. She's like, just like talk, but like not so loud so she could focus on driving.
That's
It's
so
funny.
sweet. I mean, it certainly
Yeah.
shows that you're teaching empathy, that's for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And also, I think that because she relates to it, she picked up on it right away too. So that was interesting. And then my husband, he has a more robust nervous system. So he could be really loud and he went to a lot of concerts, so his hearing's a little like low, he doesn't really perceive it as
Right.
his hearing isn't like 100%, not like bad, but not 100%. So he screams like he's like a coach
Oh,
and he talks
no.
really loud, but that's just the way he is. And sometimes I'm like, okay, can you like tone it down a little bit? And I try to explain that it's just my nervous system. I get
Right.
startled, like I really do. So it's kind of interesting. But luckily we're very respectful of each other, so that works. But it is like a completely different way of perceiving the world.
Oh, absolutely. And the startle response, to your point, is a common thing that people with high sensitivity experience. I mean, you will never find me in one of those haunted houses. It's too much. So it's interesting as you're exploring some of the things in your own life, you're actually describing some of the specific qualifiers for high sensitivity. Dr. Elaine Aron's scale is wonderful. I also have a scale on my website as well that folks can find. But I think there's a couple interesting things to note about that scale. I've had questions about, well, what if there's something on the HSP scale that doesn't apply to me? Or what if for instance, something like hunger cues. So a lot of people don't realize that being more sensitive to hunger cues can be connected to high sensitivity.
Interesting. It's interesting because my daughter, who's highly sensitive like me, she gets hangry. I get like more like that when I'm tired.
Yes. Well, because you're overstimulated,
Yeah.
probably,
Yeah.
decision fatigue and all that. And so they say, well, what if that's something that sometimes I feel impacted by and sometimes I don't? And that's why the scale asks you to note some of the time. It's not a most of the time, it's
I
some of the
see.
time.
Oh, interesting.
Because our nervous systems can be more resilient when we are more rested and when we are
Right.
more well resourced.
Totally. That makes so much sense.
So you were saying something about sound.
Hmm.
I do think that's also a very interesting and important thing to note, that sensitivity to sound can be something that's very commonly experienced. So
Hmm.
I'm curious, for you as a holistic practitioner, is there anything that you've seen work for your patients or that you can do to help people with that?
That's such a good question because, funny enough, I stumbled upon solfeggio frequencies. There was a video on it.
What?
Solfeggio frequencies it's amazing.
Solfeggio?
Yep,
Okay.
solfeggio frequencies, and
Okay.
it's basically frequencies that are very harmonious and healing to the body.
Oh, okay.
And they have, because with every sound, with all music and sound, it's actually very numerical. There's like a lot of numbers and frequencies and numbers of frequencies. And so there are certain frequencies that can cause, I guess, more disharmony in the body. And then other frequencies that are actually very compatible with the body. So they evoke more harmony, more healing. So when I learned about that, I thought that was really intriguing. And then they also have done studies on humming and oming and chanting. And
Love
that
that.
also not only calms the nervous system, but it's interesting how sound can either cause adverse effects or could be incredibly, because highly sensitive people might be even more receptive than the average for healing sounds. So that's kind
Yes.
of like the benefit. So at my work, I not only have like a channel on Pandora for solfeggio frequencies, but I do sound bowl. So like in the beginning of I put
Oh,
acupuncture,
cool.
and of course the acupuncture it's a lot more scientific. It's very scientific in a sense. I mean, you have these needles that are metal, and then you produce sounds with the sound bowl, and that sound bowl
Oh,
uses the metal as conduits that is able to actually transmit the sound into the body, to
that's
those
really
points.
cool.
So I feel like that is a perfect way to set off to start off treatment, and then have people. It's really relaxing too, and then on top of it, it's almost like a Pavlov dog response because you have a stimulation that you start to associate every time you come in. When you hear the sound bowl, it automatically puts you in a calm state if they come in regularly for treatments.
I love that because, well, and what you're talking about is conditioning when you're
Yes,
saying Pavlov's dog
but in a good way.
in a good way. Well, and this is actually a great thing about being highly sensitive is that if you are going to be in an environment that's going to cause you stress, maybe it's you have to perform or it's public speaking or you're going to be around someone who's toxic because as highly sensitives, we absorb. I saw this funny thing where it was like, don't you try to hide your mood from me. I'm highly sensitive. I've got your number. I know how you're
Oh,
feeling.
good. Yeah.
And so in those environments, if you're highly sensitive, it can be beneficial, even more beneficial for you than a non-highly sensitive person to equip yourself with things like smells that are grounding to you. Um, some people like stones, metals, textures. Like I'm trying to think if days that I know I'm going to have really heavy days, like I'm going to be seeing a lot of clients or anything like that, I'm very mindful to wear something very comfortable
Mhm.
because it makes a big difference for my nervous system.
That's amazing. That is very true because there are certain things that I've worn in certain situations and I don't feel comfortable like all day wearing that. So it's interesting how clothes can even make such a difference. And then
Mm-hmm.
knowing that ahead of time, because I always tell my patients it's all about strategy. If you know
Yes.
yourself and you know what works for you, when you implement it, you're that much more effective.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
interesting.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious for you, what do you think are some of the things you love about being highly sensitive, though, too? And I say this because I wouldn't trade it, even though it can cause things like chronic pain and sleep issues. And there's a host of things that being highly sensitive can lead to if not managed. I think
Correct.
it's also a really amazing gift. I mean, I know superpower is overused, but I feel like it's kind of like a superpower.
I agree, and I love it, and I think it makes me more intuitive,
Mm.
and, because I think that that's what it is. I think typically in this earth plane, I'll talk a little more spiritual, but also quantum physics-y, that there's many different dimensions and there's many different ways that we can perceive things, and I feel like a highly sensitive person actually has a very strong antenna, and they're able to connect with different frequencies and different energies, just like they're able to hear a lot more different sounds and different stimulation. It's because they're tuned in, and if you treat it right, it could be amazing, just like the orchid. If you meditate, I think meditation's amazing for highly sensitive individuals because it allows you, first of all, to soothe the frequencies, and you're able to really also strengthen kind of your outer chi. In Chinese medicine, there's something called wei qi. That's typically something that protects you from getting sick, but I also believe there's like an energetic wei qi, which is kind of protecting of your body, and I think that you can actually increase it and harness it so that you're able to protect yourself but still be able to be sensitive. When you can
Oh,
create that balance, I
Yeah.
think that that's when you're really able to utilize the gift, because in that case, you're able to soothe yourself to sleep and have better sleep, and perhaps even dream and connect to different elements in different worlds. And I do believe that highly sensitive people will have a tendency to be more creative, or have the potential to be more creative as well, and get ideas and be open to them. So there, and also another benefit is, I notice this with my work. If people are not as highly sensitive, or not as in tune with their body sensations or their body's cues, or don't have like body awareness, then, which is kind of like similar to my husband. He's a little bit more kind of like, he like strong with his, like his energy's more like solid, not as malleable. And so there's benefits to everything. But I notice that when people do have more body awareness and sensitivity, they will actually be much more receptive to the treatments with acupuncture, and they'll benefit a lot quicker. And maybe that's that malleability aspect of it, but they're going to be a lot more open to the treatment and to the healing.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I do agree with you holistically about the fact that the creativity piece, I love how you brought that up. And I also like that you said something about taking care of yourself so that you can still lean into your sensitivity. I truly believe, like, if we look at sensitivity, we've got the 30% I mentioned before, which is considered highly sensitive. Statistics show that there's about 30% on the other end, 20 to 30% that's low sensitive. And we're not saying not emotional or not sympathetic, but we're saying less sensitive to the nervous system's impact of the world around you. And then you've got this average range. And I think something important to note for people listening is that most of us, when we encounter certain stressors in our life, will have moments and periods of time where we do become more highly sensitive. And we all have sensitivities. And I think if we look at it too singled out, like if we look at high sensitivity as this kind of elite club, I've said this before about something that matters so much to me about this podcast is that whether or not someone's highly sensitive, I think they can gain the same wonderful pieces of wisdom, because if we as a whole leaned into sensitivity more as a society, we would be doing a whole lot more pausing and reflecting and listening and connecting, in my opinion.
Yes. I could see that. I mean, it's almost also just like it's like a nervous system. We're like parts of nerves, I feel like. And to really see us kind of connecting and communicating and understanding, and part of it is also communicating in ways that are not necessarily just verbal, and
Right.
understanding that there's more.
Absolutely. And you do look at the people who are out there creating things in the world or breaking boundaries or saying there are issues. A lot of highly sensitives tend to have a very strong moral compass.
Hmm.
And this can be painful at times for highly sensitives. There's a lot of compassion fatigue that is experienced in that realm. But if you take the deep empathy that you feel and you find some action for it, this
Hmm.
is where we get a lot of the people who are saying, wait, something is wrong here. We need to pay attention to it.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
It's kind of like the person that is aware. You have a certain scenario that happens anywhere, and then there's one person that's aware of like how another person feels, even though they're not being acknowledged in the conversation. They're kind of like picking up on it. And that's
Right.
that sort of subtle sensitivity where you're understanding another person's perspective, even though others
Absolutely.
are not.
Right. And I do find this can be a little exhausting at times too. I don't know if you feel this, but if you're constantly tuning into other people's feelings, sometimes I have to remind myself, and I talk about this with my clients, not everyone else is as highly sensitive as I am in this scenario. So
Hmm.
maybe what I'm reading into it, they may in fact not be.
Yes.
So if someone else says, I'm okay, you may want to let it go and let them own that and just let them be okay.
Well, that was another thing that I was going to say is the realization as I got older is that people, even if they're not okay, need to go through their own path. I'm not there to save everybody. Like I'm here to support. If you come to me and you have, and I and I learned this actually like years ago when I was interested more in natural healing. My husband got me some kind of Reiki class. So I learned that one of the laws or the rules that we learn is that if a person doesn't come to you for healing or doesn't ask, don't heal them. Don't just come in and say, okay,
Oh,
well,
I
I'm going to
love
heal you.
that.
Like, no, it's
Against your
not,
will.
it's against somebody else's will. And so, like, let them come
Yeah.
to you if there's, and that's when there's this open opportunity, then you can help. But if you're just kind of trying to help without really being asked, then so then I realized, well, not everything's my responsibility. Plus, I don't know what the person needs. Like, maybe the person needs to go through struggles. Sometimes the struggles help you grow. So, who knows?
I love that so much because highly sensitives do tend sometimes to struggle with codependency because of the fact that we are so aware of how other people are feeling and what they're experiencing. There can be this tendency to, one of the questions on Dr. Aaron's scale is, you know what needs to be done in a room to make others comfortable.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes the highly sensitive brain knows what needs to be done in an environment or in someone's life to make them feel happier. Like you can almost take the environmental responsibility and amplify it to something that, as you said, is not ours to own. And I'll take this a step further and say, even if someone asks you for help, if you're not energetically available and you're not fully resourced, it's still not your responsibility as a highly sensitive person, even if you know
Right.
what they need to
Yeah.
do that or own that for them.
Yeah. And I think that it's also, I guess, in a sense, like looking at people and having faith in them, even if they're not like in the perfect spot, like having faith in their potential and them being able to figure it out.
Right. I love that so much because unfortunately, highly sensitives are very appealing to narcissists
Mm-hmm.
because of their intuitive nature of knowing what the other person needs. And so, someone looking for fill me up energy
Mm-hmm.
could easily, I don't want to say prey on, but just be very drawn to a highly sensitive who doesn't have firm boundaries.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that makes a lot of sense.
How do you feel for yourself as a highly sensitive person, maybe in your life or maybe before you came to these ahas?
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever struggle with boundaries and how did you?
100%.
Okay, yeah, I'd love to hear about
Oh my
it.
God. I mean, so yeah, big time. I had one friend, I would easily feel guilty. Like that was kind of like my thing. And I had one friend who would say things and get really mean if we disagreed about something. And she would just kind of like really like hit below the belt and say things and then afterwards apologize. And then I'm like, okay, well, she apologized, she owned it, so I'm gonna let it go. And then the same thing would happen again. And they were like, it was kind of red flag, but really sweet. And it's like a slap and a kiss. And then, it's like like make it up. And then and it was like this back and forth. And so I remember getting to this point where I had just recently got married and she really didn't agree with a lot. She's very Western medicine like based. And when I would talk to her about like some of the things that I learned in Eastern, she used to just like, I don't, not just disagree with it, but sort of like put it down. And so there was this back and forth and, things like that. We would have a conversation. It would just get like not so nice. And so I remember telling my husband, I'm like, well, I can't just like leave the friendship. That would be like not, that's one thing with her. She'd never just like leave. She would have a conversation. And I was like, that I can't just abandon a person. Like I just kind of, but I was like, but I don't know what to do. And he goes, well, it's first of all, it's not your responsibility. Like whatever she chooses to do or how, she's choosing her behavior. And actually, maybe if you really do draw a firm line and not be in her life, then she could learn from this. And so it's kind of like, and that's on her, so like that was what was amazing about my husband. He's taught me so much about those boundaries because he has it naturally. Like he just natural. And he used to tell me, this is what was interesting too. He said to me, you know, because you would see that people would feel very comfortable and kind of take liberty with me emotionally. And so he used to say to me, and he would never, he was like the most healthiest relationship still till today. And this is like, we're over 20 years now. And so he said, people don't F with me. Like, he goes, people don't mess with me. And I was thinking, what is it about his energy that people don't mess with? Like, what is it? And I guess it was that interaction, or that like him not really needing other people's opinion, you know, to keep at whatever he was doing. And so I was like realizing that, and I thought about it, and it was something that I really admired. And so I started to take on that role, and I did start stronger, firmer boundaries. And I realized, you know, the way my friend was, and it was just really in her character, her what method of expression, how she communicated with me was not working for me anymore. And I just said, you know what? I'm done. I'm done. I was very clear on it. I wasn't insulting. I just said, this is not for me anymore. And that was it. I never looked back. And I always kind of kept with that really throughout life. And almost to the point where I had to be a little bit more of a hard ass with it. I just really had to say no. Like, and so there are
Right.
times where, I mean, I've had, even recently, which I haven't had in a long time, but recently, a boundary difficulty. And it was the same, similar kind of with a friend who was expecting something. And I said, I'm always going to be very upfront. But then when you start to attack my character and things like that, I'm done. No, I'm not doing it. And so I realized, like, you can have a conversation and you can say how you're feeling, and you don't have to necessarily agree. And
Right.
how I'm feeling might upset you. I'll never go for your character. I'll never do that. I'll just express the differences that I feel when a
Mhm.
person, and that's when you start to recognize that. I'm hoping that I'm not going into too many tangents, but it's when you start to recognize that, I think, as a highly sensitive person, that there's a line being crossed when a person comes at your character and starts to put you down or insult you. That's where the line is crossed. If a person says, I don't agree with you and this makes me feel this way or whatever, and
Right.
just expresses how they're feeling it and really sticks to the facts, different story. But when they start to cross over and attack your character, that's when you have to be really a hard ass and say, nope, not doing this. This is going to cross a
Yeah.
line and I'm not doing it.
And, I think also attacking your sensitivity. I think that is something that most highly sensitive people have probably experienced at least once in their life,
Yeah.
where they were told that their emotions were too much, or that they're taking something too personally, or that, they're just too much. And I
Yeah.
think that, in my opinion, that's almost an attack on your character, because it's a
Hmm.
state trait. It's part of who you are.
Yeah.
It's a gift. And if someone doesn't respect your gift by allowing you and encouraging you, like your husband does, encouraging you to have healthy boundaries. And I
Yes.
actually see boundaries as a form of compassion for a relationship, honestly, because
Yeah.
I have a little bit of a flavor of what your husband's flavor, actually. And I think it's because I grew up in an environment where I was encouraged to have boundaries, and that's to the point of what we said earlier in this podcast episode, that highly sensitive people are very malleable, and if you encourage a highly sensitive person to have boundaries and they get the positive reinforcement from that, they will be more likely to continue on with that positive behavior of having boundaries. And so when I say yes to you or anyone, you always know I mean it,
Yes.
because I'm not afraid to say no either.
I love that. Yeah.
And
I
so
understand.
that is my honestly truest form of loving someone and having compassion for them, is that that when I'm with you, I'm fully with you, because I'm not passive aggressive or resentful. I will let you know when I feel a certain way. In hopefully a sensitive way. And I think this is this beautiful thing about high sensitivity. If you own your energy and your boundaries and you get your needs met, you have so much available for other people. But it's funny. I remember having a New Year's resolution. I know resolutions are, whatever. And I had a New Year's goal, a hope, think it was 2 years ago where I said, okay, I'm going to stop being the messenger. I found that I was just kind of naturally, probably because I'm highly sensitive, the messenger for a lot of my friends giving information. And I had a girlfriend call me and ask me for another girlfriend's number or something or her address. And so even though I had it in my phone, I responded to my friend and I said, hey, I have this goal this year of not being the messenger. So I know it's an extra step or two for you, but I'm pretty sure you could find this address without my help. And it didn't rupture our relationship because I let her know my reasoning and said, I'm trying to work on boundaries with being the messenger for everyone as I'm the messenger on a podcast, something I just channeled it into a different thing. But that's the thing is that if you take your strengths and you channel them into something that lights you up, that's the beautiful part of high sensitivity. But
Yeah.
if you're taking your traits and your gifts and you're channeling them into something that drains you, that's when your nervous system will become more impacted, I believe. And, it kind of makes me think also of the fact that as a highly sensitive person, you have this opportunity to like really live life in this really rich way. That's one of my favorite things about it. Things like being moved by music and art and all of this, those are some of the gifts as well. But what we've seen in research is that to lean into these gifts, your nervous system needs to be taken care of. And there's actually research out there that shows 2 hours of unstructured alone time per day is what's recommended for highly sensitive
That
people.
makes perfect sense. I mean, it's so crazy because I feel like my older daughter would really appreciate this full conversation. It really makes a lot of sense. I mean, because I feel like without meditation, I wouldn't be able to show up the way I do. For me, that's what it is. It's that meditation and that quiet and just really getting there, which is talk about the book Quiet. I'm actually really curious to read it.
Oh, I think you'll really enjoy it. And I mean, the other thing too is that when you get this time, and sometimes people ask, does it count if I'm scrolling on my phone? Things like that for the unstructured alone time. Anything that leads your nervous system to a place of calm is
Mm-hmm.
perfectly fine. So if you're consuming content that you find calming
Mm-hmm.
and, things that are not triggering to your nervous system, scroll away. But
Mm-hmm.
I would encourage people to pay close attention to what their body feels like when they're spending this time.
Yeah.
I also, as a working mom who's busy, know that it cannot always be the easiest thing to carve out 2 hours a day. So if there's little ways to get chunks during the day, or maybe to ask your partner, or maybe if there's a way to structure your schedule in a way that gives you that time, because the brain of a highly sensitive person is like an extra version of RAM in the computer.
Mm-hmm.
And there just needs more time to let everything turn down, process, and cool off.
Yeah. And it makes sense that even before going to sleep, you want to have that buffer. But
Right.
think about it. I mean, even a shower can be part of
It's my
that.
favorite.
Yeah, because
It's
you're
my
just like
favorite.
releasing, and also water, having that hot water run through your body, it feels like it cleans your aura.
You are speaking my language. That is it, literally at the end of my work days. That is what I like to do because I can feel my whole nervous system take a deep breath
Hmm. Yeah.
and just get back to baseline and get back to where my sensitivity works for me as opposed to is working against me.
Oh, 100%. Another thing too is grounding.
What is
Like,
your favorite way to do that?
so you could do it on grass. Really my favorite way, if I could, choose a way, is walking on the beach and just
Oh,
walking on the sand,
yes.
because that also
Mhm.
massages your feet and that
Mhm.
relaxes your nervous system. And then also getting the negative ions and just being out in
Right.
nature is amazing for
Yes.
your nervous system. But if you
Yes.
do, you can get a grounding mat and
Mhm.
just ground
Oh,
at the end of the day. Yeah. So it's the same thing. It's basically connected to the cord that's connected down into the earth.
that's really cool.
Yeah.
When you said something I want to make sure people don't miss, when you said negative ions,
Hmm.
so when we are stressed, our body creates positive ionic charge, which always confuses me because it
Yeah.
sounds like it
No, I
should be
know.
the
It
other way
sounds like
around.
positive. Yeah.
Right. And that positive charge is so energetically draining. It can cause of fatigue and chronic pain and all of these things. And so salt lamps, I'm sure you have them in your office.
Mm-hmm.
They let off a negative ionic charge, which helps like a battery balance us out. And so to your point, things like the beach, wide open spaces, moving water have a lot of negative ionic charge,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And also, well, what I do have at my office is what is it called? The biomat. And it
What's
also
that?
has, so it's basically a biomat. It has amethyst crystals, and it also
Ooh,
gives, and it heats up and has infrared heat and negative ions, and it's really amazing.
that's so cool. It's funny. This episode is going to come out in the new year, but we're recording right before Christmas. And now I'm thinking I need to add that to my Christmas
Yes,
list.
it's an investment, but it's amazing.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Well, Michelle, I could literally talk about this topic with you for hours, and there's so many great resources out there for people that they could check out. I would highly recommend the Highly Sensitive Refuge. That's a wonderful blog. It's the largest in the world. Have you ever read any of the
No, but
articles
I'm
from
gonna
there?
check it out.
I have some articles on there, so you can find some of mine on there as well. I
Awesome.
really love also the founders of that blog wrote a beautiful book called Sensitive that I would highly recommend.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, Dr. Aaron's website, hsperson.com, has a lot of resources. Her documentary, Sensitive, The Untold Story, is
Oh, that's
beautiful. And
cool.
that was where I learned about high
Oh,
sensitivity,
wow.
was
Yeah.
just stumbling upon the documentary when I was looking for something to watch one day. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember clicking the TV off and just tears. Like
Oh,
I felt
wow.
so seen and so aware for the first time, and just knew that it was a huge passion and my mission to make sure we all understand sensitivity. So for anyone who wants to learn more about your beautiful, healing practices and offerings and how to keep in touch with you and your podcast, where can they find all of that?
Thank you. So michelleoravitz.com is pretty much where you can find everything. I like to hang out on Instagram, and it's at the Wholesome Lotus Fertility. And I offer online or in-person treatments, well, online virtual consultations
Oh,
for
awesome.
anybody who's struggling with fertility. But I also do a fertility certification if somebody's interested in becoming a fertility coach. So I love all things fertility. It's just something that I feel really passionate about. And I have the podcast, the Wholesome Fertility Podcast.
That's cool. I didn't know you taught other folks how to coach
Yeah,
around
so it was
fertility. That's really
basically
neat.
something I would have loved to have. And then I learned from different people, and then I pretty much combined everything that I learned and kind of like the hard way and made it really
Right.
easy to certify others.
Oh, I love that. And if anyone listening loved this episode, you've also been on before talking about using acupuncture and holistic measures for fertility. So go ahead and jump back, check that one out. Feel free to rate it and share it with anyone who's on that journey. So, Michelle, again, thank you so much for coming. And we'll just have to keep in touch because I just love talking with you.
Same. I enjoyed our conversations like every time. It's always
Me
like there's
too.
nothing, we never run out of things to say.
Agreed.
Thank
Okay,
you so
well,
much for
thanks,
having me.
Of course. And you'll have to come back sometime. And thanks everyone for listening, and be well, everyone.